Hello and welcome once again to The Blueprints. This is Canada's Conservative Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Schmale, Member of Parliament for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock, with new content for you every single Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this program. On today's show, we are talking about Justin Trudeau's dancing at Taylor Swift while Montreal burns, as well as the Liberals' soft-on-crime approach. To talk about this and much, much more, we bring on the critic for public safety, the Member of Parliament for Kildonan and St. Paul, Raquel Dancho. Thanks for coming on the show.
Wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's been a long time since I've been on the show, and so much has changed in terms of the public safety and the way Canadians feel on the street. I don't think too many people feel overly safe, and they're kind of questioning the fact that crime rate's going up and the community isn't the same. However, over the weekend in Montreal, riots were breaking out, and the Prime Minister did not seem very concerned about that. I want to play a video, so let's cue up cut one. We'll get right to the video right away and then get your comments on that. So let's play cut one. Okay, so I get he's having time with his daughter, going to Taylor Swift. I think long lineups for tickets. I get all that. I get all of that. However, this was a pretty serious situation, and I think we agree at this table that a lot of Justin Trudeau's policies have led to what we are seeing now, the crime and chaos on our streets.
Certainly. I mean, it's just a very visual representation that Trudeau dances while Montreal burns and the rest of Canada suffers from his soft-on-crime policies. We need a serious leader for these serious issues, and it's very evident that we don't have that. And when you're looking at the protests that we saw, certainly this is from coming after, 14 months of Liberals really turning their back on the Jewish community and really not taking a strong stance to show their support for what Jewish Canadians have been through over the past 14 months. And certainly just allowing these things to transpire, we're seeing them escalate. The language goes further and further and further. We're hearing in many of these protests calling for the annihilation of the Jewish people. Like, this is Canada in 2024 after 9 years of Liberal government. This is what we have.
Absolutely, and the videos that we saw in Montreal, it's near recognizable. If you think 10 years ago, before the Liberals took power, crime was on the way down, productivity was up, the economy was booming, and now we have the complete opposite of all of that. Maybe we can just quickly pull up the graphic. That's Pierre Poilievre's response.
Pierre really hits the nail on the head here. You know, why is it that we're seeing all these different types of protests? You know, of course, the anti-Jewish protests we're seeing are just reprehensible, and they just seem to be getting worse and worse. Of course, there's been a number of thwarted, thankfully, terrorist plots to bomb and massacre Jews in Canada, and from folks who've entered into Canada on their way to Brooklyn, New York. These things are all related. And certainly I think Pierre really talks about what's emboldened a lot of these violent protests in this issue and across the board. And it's the Prime Minister's sort of his tactic to really divide people into groups and pit them against each other. This has consequences after 9 years. We're almost looking at a decade where we've had a Prime Minister run elections on dividing the country and pitting it against each other. And of course, is it any surprise that we're seeing what we saw in Montreal? No, I don't think it is. Yeah,
it's a real dangerous path when everyone is looking at everybody else. That spirit of unity and what makes us Canadian.
Right.
He's stripped it away one by one.
Right.
It's actually very shameful how he did this. So leading that into what you just mentioned, the soft-on-crime approach. So let's take a look at these crime statistics here. So there it is, on the way down. So Stephen Harper came into power in 2006 with the minority, and another minority parliament. In 2011, the majority parliament. You look at those numbers, see that start to drop, and then bang, what happened in 2015?
Oh, we got this Trudeau Jr. coming in.
And up they went.
Yes. And, you know, it's interesting when you look at this. So right around 2019 is when we saw a number, like they've been putting forward soft on crime justice bills the whole time. But certainly 2019 was a very painful year for the crime that we're seeing, because it really put in a number of measures that had a pivotal change in the shift of the way that we do justice in this country. So one is, we know it very well, Bill C-75, of course, made bail the default for violent repeat offenders. So rather than keeping violent repeat offenders with long track records of being clear that they can't follow the law and they do nothing but harm and cause chaos and crime in our streets, rather than being kept behind bars awaiting trial, now they're just let out, often on the same day. When we're talking for violent offenses, hurting people, murdering people, stealing cars, all these different kinds of things. It's gotten to the point, it's so utterly ridiculous that this catch and release justice policies that we're seeing, police know a lot of these offenders on a first name basis because they've arrested them so many times. And the reality is in our cities, there's actually not a lot of people that are doing crime. It's just a 100, 200, 300 baddies that are doing the vast majority of crime. And yet what the Liberals have decided to do is just made it worse. Let's just let them run rampant on the street with no consequences. And then if we can finally do get them to go to jail, which is also becoming increasingly rare, because if we look at Bill C-5, took out mandatory prison time for violent firearm offenses. So you can commit drive-by shootings and you're not necessarily going to jail anymore. It used to be, a 4-year, I think, mandatory minimum. Now you can serve house arrest and enjoy your sentence from the comfort of your home with your buddies, watching TV, playing video games. That's not justice.
That's not a punishment.
No, not at all. And so not getting these violent repeat offenders getting bail, if they finally do get to jail, which is not necessarily the case anymore, but we saw also in 2019 Bill C-83, which we were just talking about. Bill C-83, of course, took the priority of keeping the public safe as number one priority for parole considerations. It made it so it was the least onerous, or the conditions in essence. So that's where we're seeing folks getting out on parole easier.
So
if you're setting this up,
you do a crime, not an 18-year-old who just made a mistake. So you do a serious crime, you get arrested, you go through the system. Most likely you get out on bail really quick, as you said, very, very quickly. And if you are convicted, you then go to serve some sentences at home with your feet up playing video games. But now we have a case, as you pointed out, with 83, that even the most horrible criminals are getting the treatment of a lifetime.
The absolute worst.
We have a
monsters.
graphic here of Paul Bernardo. Their family's not allowed to be in the parole board hearing, which is just incredible when you're talking about the families of Kristen French and Leslie Mahaffey, the two Ontario women who were tortured and killed. The worst of the worst, Luca Magnotta, among many others that are now running around in a medium security. This is incredible.
I know it's wild to think that in Canada we don't really have a system. It seems it's easy to get discouraged about this because it seems we have a system that doesn't really focus on justice, on that punishment side. Serving your sentence, for example, Paul Bernardo should be in maximum security prison and come out in a box. Yeah. And in our system with C-83 is a direct example of that. It's just the idea is that we should put them in lesser and lesser conditions, less strenuous conditions, and eventually have them rehabilitate themselves with some programming and get out of jail. That sort of seems to be the Liberal philosophy of justice, rather than holding these monsters accountable for the rest of their natural life, or at least a life sentence. Right. So Mr. Bernardo was in max security prison and was recently moved to medium. So that's a whole bunch more privileges for him. Way more freedoms as far as prisons go and penitentiaries go. Why does he deserve that? Why would he ever deserve anything but a windowless cell for his entire sentence, and hopefully longer? And I just can't, it's so difficult, I think, for Canadians to understand how is this justice? And it's not just him. You mentioned a couple others, and if we think of, I don't even like saying their names, any of these monsters' names, but the murderers, there was a woman and her boyfriend that murdered Tori Stafford back in 2009. It's a difficult thing to talk about, but we are lawmakers, and this is the situation under 9 years of Liberals. So we had an 8-year-old girl who was lured away after school with the promise of puppies by this woman, and who brought her to her boyfriend at the time, and she. It's difficult to talk about, but she held her down while her boyfriend raped her and beat her to death. Yeah. Then they just threw her body in the woods, and they didn't find her for months. And when they did, she had no clothes on from the waist down, and they were only able to identify her because of her Hannah Montana t-shirt and butterfly earrings. We're talking about an 8-year-old child. This woman should be in maximum security prison forever.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
she is in, two of our MPs went to the penitentiary where she's in and saw her. She's walking, it's like an open air campus style penitentiary, medium security. She's living in sort of almost looks like nice housing, living room, kitchen, bedroom, comforts of home, next door to a woman and child program. So she's able to see beautiful children.
Yeah.
How is this allowed? I get really worked up about it because this woman is a monster and should be treated like one.
Absolutely. And to that point exactly. So when you have these worst of the worst getting the best treatment, I agree they should be locked away
sick.
forever if convicted, and they were. And then you look at the crime stats, you see how many more victims there are out there.
So many.
Right?
Seeing sexual assaults have gone up 75%. Sexual violations against children 120% since Trudeau took office. Why is that? Well, if you're not able to put people in jail, and if they're getting out of jail early, and if while they're awaiting their court date, they're out on bail, what message does that send to criminals? Does that not embolden them? We see this all the time. Criminals know the law. They know that they're not getting mandatory minimums anymore, that they can just get house arrest and be out in the streets in no time. It's ridiculous. And the case of Tori Stafford's killer, of these other monsters, these are policy changes that can be made. The minister can, of course, direct the head of Corrections Canada. Of course, that's in the legislation. And if it can't go far enough, they could put forward legislation to repeal the parts of Bill C-83 that did a lot of this damage. They can make these changes. That's what the public needs to know, Jamie. These changes were made, they can be unmade. We can hold criminals accountable, we can get them off the streets, and we can hold monsters in maximum security prison until the end of their days. Those things can be done in Canada. We just need a change of government.
Well, exactly. And there doesn't seem to be that political will at the same time, which I can't...
It's just wild.
I can't seem to figure this out, right? Because if you look where some of the Liberals hold their seats, it's downtown Toronto, it's Vancouver, Montreal, where the crime rate has gone up and people are scared in a lot of cases. And they just... I can't... They must be getting phone calls and emails from their constituents. They have to be.
They must be. It's very difficult to comprehend, and it's difficult to have a even temperament about this when you see these things as a parent, as a woman. It's just unbelievable that a government that purports itself to be feminist endorses and passes policies and defends them when they see their record. It's very perplexing, to say the least. This is not a feminist government. This is not a government who cares about women. This is a government who wants to coddle criminals and ignore victims' rights.
Yes, absolutely. And continues to allow massive amounts of overdosing in our streets.
Is it 40,000 now since Trudeau took over, and most of them are young people?
Yeah, it's in record highs. We've never seen this before.
And what is their response to, allow government taxpayer-funded drugs? That's their answer to this. I'm sure you saw that video of outside that hospital. It was in BC. There was a dispenser, like you go get chips or a Pepsi or something, but no, you can get free crack pipe kits.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing now in front of hospitals? Really?
Right.
Why isn't the focus, there's only so many taxpayer dollars. Why is the focus on these taxpayer-funded drug dens and not on recovery centers? When did the left become a movement that decided to facilitate drug addiction rather than facilitate recovery?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Why? What's their fascination with this? Anybody looking at the numbers, a rational human being looks at these numbers and go, oh my goodness, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 Canadians dead from overdosing. Yeah. Our direction is not the right one. So they double down on it? Are they afraid to go backwards? I don't know. I can't get into the head of a Liberal, but I just can't imagine looking at these numbers and saying, yeah, our program's bang on.
Really, and just it was I think when our leader Pierre Poilievre first got elected, it was one of the first issues he really took on, and all of the mainstream media just lambasted him when he took on these taxpayer-funded drug dens. But because of that courage, I think it's really moved the conversation to where people are really at. You talk to people in a lot of these neighborhoods or who live adjacent to these neighborhoods who have children and they can't go to the playgrounds because there's dirty taxpayer-funded needles everywhere. They're having to walk over people taking their kids to school that are injecting themselves with various drugs. This isn't the communities that we all work hard to pay taxes for. And these people are suffering. And we're just handing them more drugs rather than taking them to recovery. This is a critical conversation, and people are going to continue to die unless we make policy changes.
And it also erodes, in a way, a lot of the trust people have in our institutions as Canadians, right? Because you're asked, especially right now, asked or being told, whatever way you prefer, being told to pay ever more taxes, right? You're working twice as hard to take in half as much. Your dollar isn't going as far as it used to go, and now it's unsafe to walk out of your home in some cases, or even go to the park without, as you said, finding a needle in the playground, right? There's homeless encampments everywhere because the price of housing is incredible right now. The price of food is out of control. All done by policy from this Liberal government.
Yeah, it's failed policy results everywhere you look.
Yeah.
Everywhere you look, you see the results of these radical leftist policies. And I think people are really getting tired of it. I mean, we see that reflected in the polls. We are focused on common sense issues. Common sense issues. We want to build the homes, fix the budget, stop the crime, and axe the carbon tax. These are and the GST on new homes. So these are things that are tangible that people can understand.
That makes sense.
These are the bread and butter, like meat and potato issues that I think people are desperate to see a return to from governments. Governments who call it like it is and use common sense approach to things. It's enough of this division caused by the Liberals, by their focus on these radical policies that have resulted, as you've said, in thousands of encampments, and really Canada should be one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Frankly, one of the wealthiest countries to ever exist, and yet we have thousands of homeless encampments. What is it? 1 in 4 parents are going with less food to feed their kids. 2 million people a month at food banks in Canada.
Right.
In Canada.
Right.
In 2024. And where is what are the Liberals, what is their position here? Because if it's not their fault, Jamie, this is the thing that's really
It's never
troubling.
their fault.
If 9 years at the helm and none of this is their fault, then what are they doing there? If it's not their fault, then obviously they can't fix it. So why on earth should Canadians vote for them again? Just to use their own arguments.
Yeah.
If nothing is their fault, then obviously they can't fix it, right?
Yeah, they're not equipped to fix it.
No, obviously not.
They can't figure it out.
They are the worst governing managers I think we've seen in generations in this country. It is shocking their lack of ability to follow through even on their promises, many of which we don't agree with, but the ones even that perhaps could make an impact, you could see nothing. Nothing follows through except for disarray and crime and chaos and poverty and suffering. Like, what is it? 1 in 3 children are suffering from some level of poverty. I believe our colleague Michelle Ferrari was seeing that. Like, this is unbelievable.
Yeah, scurvy's back, I think, in some communities.
Scurvy because people just can't afford fruits and vegetables.
Yeah.
And it's just wild. The housing crisis is shocking. I mean, obviously, and we see how the Trudeau Liberals respond to things, right? If we look at immigration, it's a perfect example of how they respond to things. So they caused this mess. They brought in, 6 million people in 9 years and had no plan for housing, no plan for doctors, no plans for schools or roadways or water treatment facilities, nothing. And it's unleashed this housing crisis in our country, or at least part of the contributing factor to that. And now they're sort of saying, oopsies, we'll do a little take backsies. But we're not apologizing for making this massive disaster and really breaking.
You got to look to government to fix it.
Oh, I know, but they'll fix it. But they didn't really
right.
break. It must have been other people's problem. Bad actors,
Yes, bad actors,
as Trudeau said. But certainly we know it is him who is the bad actor, who is causing all this misery. And it's time for him to go.
I agree. All right. Based on what you said, I just came to this, okay? I got a brainwave here. You can disagree with me or not. Then we got to get out of here. We are pretty much out of time. Okay, so common sense, right? We want to go back to common sense, which most people would agree with. At least that's what the polling is showing. Who knows what the polls? Liberals, or at least those that feel they're above the common person, can't agree with what the common person thinks because they're not elite at that point. Right? You can't agree with what the common people usually agree on, which is treatment instead of more government drugs, right? Those just the things that make sense to many people.
Right.
But if you agree with what the common people think, then you're not elite. So you can't be, these liberals who think they're above everyone.
Yeah, it really is. Since I got elected, it's been, you don't want to believe the worst of people, but it's impossible to ignore this liberal elitism of really looking down their noses at the common people and saying, we know what's best for you. You work hard, we'll just take half of it, and we know best how to spend your money. and we'll create all these wonderful levels of
programs,
bureaucracy,
more programs.
more forms and checklists
Yes.
will surely solve the problem, and we can do no wrong because we're liberals. And all these problems over 9 years, that's not us. It's wild. And I just think
really is.
Canadians are sick and tired of being talked down to by liberal elites who have no idea what the day-to-day struggles are of them. It's time for them to go, Jamie.
I couldn't agree with you more. I don't know how you're going to close this out, but I think it was Reagan. The more the more the plans fail, the more the planners plan, and that pretty much simplifies and outlines what this government's all about. As you know, the guests have the last word. You can close it out any way you want, although you kind of did well there. I don't know how you're going to top that.
Well, I think I think if you and I are honored and entrusted under Pierre Poilievre's leadership to form a majority government in the next election, we're going to have a heck of a lot of work to do, a lot of cleanup to do, and back to common sense, Jamie.
Common sense it is. Raquel Dancho, thank you very much. Member of Parliament for Kildonan and St. Paul, also the public safety critic. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share this program. If you like what you've heard, you can tell your friends. They can download it on platforms like CastBox, iTunes, Google Play, and Spotify. New content for you every single Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Until next week, remember, low taxes, less government, more freedom. That's the blueprint.